if you have to appreciate architecture, then you have to perhaps look at it through 6 categories. And those 6 categories are ecologically based architecture, people's architecture, religion related architecture, need based architecture, then sellable architecture, and the art of architecture. But you have to see these 6 categories by looking and observing the elements of architecture. Those elements are the flooring, the walls, and the roofing. Of course, there are doors and windows. So there are primary and secondary elements. Together, they will form the idea of architecture in our minds. Now let's look at the art of architecture carefully. How does it differ from the other categories? Art means there is something more than the function. It's not necessary that the program given by the client, given by the owner, is what is followed by the architect. The architect forms his own program. He writes his own program. And how he imagines the whole thing, how he conceives the whole thing becomes very, very pivotal to the building design. And he can get his signals and signs from various things. They could be through architecture, they could be without architecture. They could be coming from literature, they could be coming from environment, they could be coming from ecology, they could be coming from this local context or the building material and the technology. So it can vary dynamically and it can differ completely. So the field of art of architecture varies and it can be classified into various kinds of attitudes. Any place, any new town that we want to visit, we have to go and see buildings, we have to go and see architecture, without which the experience of that place seems to be incomplete. Now credit of this goes to art of architecture. Now right from the 14th century, early 14th century to almost late 18th century, Mughals built some marvelous buildings throughout this country, from the north to south. Every building is of a different kind, different variety. There are gardens. Based on the model of Taj Mahal, we have this in Aurangabad, Bibi Ka Maqbara, which was built for Aurangzeb's wife, Dilras Banu. And unlike the Taj, which was built in marble, this building has been built in plaster. Aurangzeb was a very modest person. He didn't want to spend too much money, and the buildings which are assigned to him are built very simplistically. So in the art of architecture, what comes to our mind first is the kind of place that it requires. Surroundings, huge surroundings are required, without which the entire campus of monumental architecture remains incomplete. We have to wander around the buildings, we have to go inside, spend some time there, and then observe this monumental architecture in order to be able to appreciate it. Another very, very important feature of Mughal architecture is the very imaginative use of geometry. And when I say that, it is related to the whole site, because such a large plot has been so cleverly used with tremendous calculation and methodically dividing each and every small area. So you find squares, rectangles, octagons used for pavements, seating areas, patios, fountains, water bodies, and with the help of this, the entire garden is created so that you can spend a relaxing day in this entire campus. When walls are built in mud or even brick, and walls are raised high up, then they become very massive in thickness. So in order to reduce their thickness and to give it adequate support, structural means are like buttresses, which is what we find here. These are called buttresses, which are shaped to support the wall. It's purely a structural measure which became interesting and artistically used in Gothic architecture. If in the old days, what was important architecturally speaking were gardens and the tombs
and the maqbaras. Today we have museums, we have large institutions and educational campuses. They give you the opportunity to create great architecture. Institutional architecture can be a subject by itself. In India as well as abroad, it has tremendous tradition. In India, for instance, we have had universities like Nalanda University, House Khas University, and campuses have been developed in the past by Hindus, Muslims in different orders. Then we have had post-industrial revolution attitude expressed in institutional architecture as well. Here in this campus we see a marvelous campus designed by a very well-known senior architect Achyut Kanvinde. Now this campus has several buildings. It has residential areas, it has seminar halls, it has canteens, it has administration and so on. And the whole key to the campus design lies in what kind of relationship is one able to achieve between different activities. Because the interaction between the student and the teacher is considered to be of prime importance. Now therefore the whole key remains that various buildings have to be interconnected. So not only the individual buildings have importance, but the connecting elements become of prime importance, such as the corridors connecting them become part of the main expression of architecture. Like three-dimensional form or color, which is sculptural, even texture is extremely important. So what is being used in this case is the exposed aggregate plaster, which consists of various kinds of stones and pebbles or crushed aggregate, which can be used in plaster form, and the top cement could be washed off, and it becomes economical in the long run because it has no external maintenance later on. One of the qualities of Kanvinde's architecture is each building has been designed with proper attention to its functional aspect. Here we are in the library. Now although it is integrated well, this building has been designed in itself very well. Here you got natural light coming through, and it has been used very positively to create certain effects. To create peace here, to create very well lit stacks and allow this kind of natural light and ventilation throughout this building. Now by the use of this correct skylight, he also generates a form for the building. We are at the Kala Akademi Goa at Panjim. The building is beautifully placed. The location is wonderful. It's on the bank of the river. The designer of this building, the famous renowned architect Charles Correa, has designed it in step-by-step manner. The building steps up and does not climb up very much. The second point to note in this design is the spaces downstairs are meandering. They intermingle with each other. The squares, rectangles and straight lines which exist in modern architecture are used here very imaginatively, because this institution is for music and dance. Music and dance require creative kind of spaces, which is why you find that the spaces related to a particular activity are mixing with each other and are wonderfully juxtaposed. The third thing to note in this building is modern architecture had turned its back to paintings on walls. In fact, he has accepted that a painting could create illusion and could create like a backdrop in a stage. So these things have been used wonderfully to create new effects in this building. Dance and music are performing arts. Performing arts require imaginatively designed spaces where students can perform interestingly, imaginatively. So every classroom is very imaginatively linked up with a terrace, and that terrace is utilized by students for rehearsals and for performance both. In the entire campus, there are 4 theatres in the open air, and one as an intimate theatre. The second is the arena theatre, which can be viewed from all directions. And the third is an open air theatre, which is large in capacity. So we have 3 theatres. The 4th theatre is used for ceremonies and functions. So in this building, the terraces are used for rehearsals by the local theatre groups. So every space in the building gets utilized for performing arts very imaginatively, and that is the success of this building. Achyut Kanwinde is one of the pioneers of modern architecture in India. Practicing from Delhi, he's designed some wonderful buildings all over the country. This is one such building, the Science Museum of Bombay. Now, a science museum kind of building requires large space, enormous volume, and to ventilate that in this kind of adverse climate where humidity is very high. And in this building, they have a ventilating mechanical device which suck the hot air from the museum below and throw it up into the sky. And that element, which is basically a functional element, has been used here effectively to give character to the building. They looked at the function and they handled the function to give form to the building. So one of the major works of the pioneer of modern architecture in India, Achyut Kanwinde. In the art of architecture, it is necessary to do further classification, and here at Mahendra Guest House we find that the issues like the local character and the reference to the context. For instance, if you come here, this is the Mahendra Management Center close to Nasik. We find that the designer of this campus, the very imaginative architect of Nasik, Sanjay Patil, he has conceived of this whole thing as a place which is away from Nasik. So it has to have the village, the out of the city look. And the entire campus has got rectangular and square pavilions, which are all roofed with Mangalore tile roofing. Mangalore tile roofing has to project out of the wall, so it has to keep distance with the other rectangles, other corridors. And while doing so, what Sanjay Patil has done is he has created a series of courtyards, which also is a traditional element of architecture. He's got the entire structure of this building done in steel rather than in wood. Normally the traditional houses in Mangalore tile had wooden structures. So here he has used all the building elements which are very contemporary. The steel joinery, the rafters, the purlins, everything has been worked out very neatly. It evokes the tradition, it evokes the past, but it does not use the same traditional material right throughout. So here, this is a contextual art and used in a traditional way. It's not a rebellious art, but very sensitively, very sympathetically, it has looked at the concepts and tradition. Elements of architecture like the column, the wall, the floor, the staircase have a unique role to play in the art of architecture. Here, this column, which is a mighty column, goes up more than 2 floors and then sprouts at the top, receives all the structural members like a tree. And therefore, in this large space, which is an entrance hall, it has a very significant role to play. For instance, the staircase. Staircase is the only inclined plane in the space of building. Here, the architect has not only played with the the straight flight with a landing is also used the craft on the railing, so the space has become very interesting and transparent. The squatty buildings, just a double-story structure and a multi-story structure, have to be handled in a completely different manner. That is precisely what we must learn from Kanchenjunga. This is quite an extraordinary building designed by Charles Correa, a very well-known architect of Bombay. It is Kanchenjunga, having 32 luxury apartments, and the most interesting parts of this design are that flats have been interlocked in such a manner that everywhere on all sides there are verandas, double-heighted terraces and windows available to receive this breeze from the sea. If you are designing a building in a place like Bombay, a metropolis like Bombay, then you have to address 2 or 3 climatic constraints very categorically. First is the climate is very adverse, it's hot and humid. The building is located quite close to the seashore, so you can get almost horizontal rains slashing the building. So how do you protect it? You have to protect it by having some kind of an apron. So this is what Charles Correa was trying to do, to create an apron around the building of verandas. Now this is a traditional element. Here the apron has been handled quite imaginatively. You get terraces which are double heighted and they are staggered in such a way that every corner looks different. They are colored differently and they are proportioned differently. So with the result, you get a building, a very unique kind of extraordinary multi-storied building in the urban landscape of Bombay, which rises like a totem of Red Indians. From multi-storied buildings in Bombay, let's come to the Goan architecture done by Gerard D'Acunha. When we talk about the basic elements of architecture and when we look at walls, the walls need not be just straight walls. Walls can add to the formal quality, they can add to the texture. They are not only meant to take load of the roof to the ground, but in doing so, they can take liberty with the form. Here is an example of a house designed by Gerard D'Acunha, wherein the brick pier is becoming an arch. Neither has the arch been thought about separately, but together they have been fused into making a new form for a porch. Here is a building of a museum of works on Goa. And here, Mangalore tile and laterite stone have been used imaginatively to intermingle with each other and to create a form which is entirely economical and as a result of the materials themselves. Here is a building designed by Gerard D'Acunha. This is a building of a play school. Now, in this building, all the spaces have been devised with the scale of children in mind. The materials used here are very simple: brick, broken ceramic tiles, wasted steel bars, but together they create a form and create an interest which holds the interest of the children. All this is possible when an architect wants to design according to his own imagination and perception. This is where art of architecture starts. Going on a slide, in fact, he has used a slide as the main entrance of the school. All the classrooms have small doors to go through. classrooms are connected to gardens, gardens are connected to terraces, and so there have been a number of spaces which could be put to imaginative use. That's the crux of this design.
Now let's see the campus of CDSA and a house designed by Girish Doshi at Pune.
Architecture and nature have a symbiotic relationship. They cannot exist without each other, and they are totally integrated. It is one way to think that there is a plot and within that you put a house or you put a building. But the other way of thinking is that the land and the building are together and all well integrated. In this campus of CDSA designed by architect Christopher Benninger, we find that the landforms come into the building, they merge, and sometimes in some cases the land comes into the thing. Another aspect of this campus is the concepts of modernity. Now, this kind of modern aesthetic norm has been used very intelligently to give a local context or to respect the local context. Now, local context being the villages around Pune, which have Mangalore tile roofing and stone structures. Now, both the elements have been used here, but in a modern way, in a contemporary way. And in doing so, what the architect has tried to do is to bring the landforms within, to bring birds, the sky, the natural light, breeze. Now all these rooms are facing west, so it gets a lot of breeze into the rooms. Similarly, if you use the Deccan trap stone, has been used to express its ruggedness, to express its verticality, and to give a very nice texture to the walls. So it becomes a very integral kind of building vis-a-vis landscape. This is a house designed by architect Girish Doshi for Mr. Dhiren Kurani in Pune. Now, the characteristics of this particular house are that it is designed on a certain module. Module is a spatial module as well as a construction module, because the hollow brick has been used, hollow concrete block has been used. With the result, you have a certain dimensionality as you go up and as you go down, horizontally, vertically. And then you play with spaces, because you reduce the height, you increase the height, or you bring open spaces within the house, and you bring the sky inside. All this is happening with that hollow concrete block in mind. As he closes the sides, but he brings the open spaces from the top as well as through the compound walls by intermeshing it properly with the interior spaces. So you have very, very flexible definitions, like the bedroom also has a skylight, the toilets are twisted, and small little spaces with unassuming staircases and meandering kind of spaces linking each other. So there is no rigid kind of attitude to designing the house. Here the architectural expression really takes a very, very creative dimension, and the space becomes very seriously playful because of the open spaces being handled so well and brought inside the house. Now let's look at a house of an architect, designed by an architect for his work, that is his studio and his residence. Of course, it is my own house, designed by me. Art of architecture takes its inspiration from quite a few different kinds of fields. It takes its inspiration from what we see in the day-to-day landscape, day-to-day activity. Now in this building, one finds that there are so many forms, interactive forms are put together. It gives an impression of so many houses, not one house. So it becomes a kind of hybrid mixture of many materials and many forms. They are put together without really thinking about how they will appear. Now here in this house, forms therefore give the impression of a similar kind of a built landscape, but it is done deliberately. It is done with some aesthetic point of view. Windows are primary elements and they can really affect how a building appears, how a building looks. And if the design of any window is done with proper thought given to how the sun moves, here we find that inside is a design studio and the window has been designed to cut off the harsh western light and at the same time to admit breeze which bounces against the shutter and enters inside. Like the primary elements in architecture, even the secondary elements have a role to play. And here we find that a window has been designed and is put into a frame. Now frame has been designed in some concrete precast panels. The panels have been jointed together and with a groove they have been left away from the wall. There is a grill placed in this frame itself. So it has been accepted as a part of total aesthetic strategy for a house. Creation of space is one of the prime objectives of architecture because this is what really creates delight and novelty in the space planning. It could be created by the correct use of symmetry, geometry, but here in an abstract way, space has been created by using different surfaces, different angles and playing with light. Light which is filtering down by this through the skylight displays all these surfaces which are playing a game of space. Normally it is understood that buildings have 4 elevations, but it is not necessary. Like Le Corbusier pointed out that a building could have 5th elevation as to how the building appears from the top. Here also, in an abstract way, different skylights, a ventilating fan, a water tank, a railing, all can be designed in such a way that they contribute to the form of the house.
So what we saw just now in the scope of art of architecture is that how and where the concept comes into the design. And the concept can originate completely out of the field of architecture or it can originate in the field of architecture. It could emerge from literature, it could emerge from aesthetics of literature, it could be an idea coming from theatre, it could be an idea coming from painting and murals. It could be looking at a tall building and its tall quality going scraping the sky high, and it could come from various issues. So the scope of art of architecture really varies and it is unpredictable. Many times it is rebellious. Sometimes it is contextual and it tries to relate to the context. Sometimes it rebels with the context. So this is the potential of art of architecture.